let's go over how to get your project rendered out of Maya and make sure that you have it properly set up with all of the correct render settings and you know where it's going. So keep in mind, you've been testing out and checking through the render view to make sure that you are getting the correct lighting, everything looks good in your scene. Also, what you need to be aware of too, think about that render time that you have for that single frame. This window is what we're going to be working with when we're rendering out of Maya. So I'm going to close. This is just a current test shot that I've got. What I also want to do is make sure, I'm just going to play back kind of what I've got here in my scene. I kind of removed a couple of things. I've got that camera shot as well here where I have it cutting. That's all totally fine. So I'm going to be animating to 120 right here. So what you're going to need to do, first off, make sure your file is properly set. So I'm going to go to File, Set Project, make sure that it is going to that folder it needs to go to. And what you're going to do now is go to the render settings. So we're going to go right here. Oh, and also too, not only are all your files set, but you have all of your textures, materials, everything like that. Hit 6 hardware texturing to make sure that you've got everything set up with your materials. What I would recommend doing is having like a checklist as well and make sure that you are following this whole setup that I'm doing right now. So go to, also I want to make sure I'm in that camera, and yes, camera 1 is set right now. Okay, so it's 1280 by 720 set up with camera 1, and that's the camera I've used for my animation. And I need to go into my render settings, and this whole window right in here is super, super important. So let's go through the first thing. Okay, so we're using that master layer Arnold renderer. That is what you want to always render out of, okay? That's the renderer we've got built into Maya that we're using. Now, the other thing we need to consider too is let's look at that file path. Make sure, this is super important. What it's telling you is where it's going to be saving the files, and that's going to be in the images. So you're actually going to render out a series of images, and they get saved to the images folder, not source images, images. So just make sure it's getting, that file is properly set. I also know that that file name here that's what it's going to be saved as. That's fine. What we want to do here is go to, first off, in the file output, image format. Yours is probably set to Maya. Switch it to PNG. You also have JPEG, but I'm going to go with PNG because PNG does allow you to have transparency if you want that. If you don't, then you're fine with JPEG too. It's JPEG or PNG works. Usually it's maybe just sometimes a touch faster with PNG. I'm going to leave it at integer 8, dither as well. I'm going to use the color space view transform. Okay. If you're still having issues with it being dark, let me know. That's probably a color space issue. Also, what I'm going to do here, this is super, super important. Frame/animation ext. That means the extension, file extension. So right now it's getting saved as a PNG. That's great, but that's just a single frame. What you need to do is select, I like to go with, there's this option, name number, meaning frame number, dot extension, or name underscore hashtag or number. That's like the frame number dot extension. Don't ever use this or this. And not this one either. So I don't know, these 3 exist, but After Effects does not like them at all, okay? So make sure you use this option or this option, okay? And as a group, decide on it because it's super important to make sure you all have the same settings. So I'm gonna select this. I'm gonna also leave my frame padding refers to the number of zeros. Do you see how it's set to 4 here? So that gives me those 2 extra zeros in case I want to add on later to my animation. And I'm going up into the thousands. That's totally fine. 4 is perfectly fine for what you need right now. And I'm not going to do any kind of custom extension or version label. Now, this is important too, your frame range. What I would recommend, so it's going from 1 to 10 I'm going to set it to 120 just here, so it'll kind of start populating and do this. I would recommend you can work in, you don't want to do 1 through 1080. You want to make sure that you are working in smaller chunks, just in case if you need to re-render a frame or two, that makes sense. It's totally fine. Sometimes it's just easier to work in smaller batches, and I would think about them in like maybe 300, 200, 400 frames, somewhere around there. Don't go too far. Or, you know, because the thing is you also want to see how long it's going to take your computer to do and kind of maybe work your way up. Start with 100, 200, that way. Okay, so I know this computer's pretty fast usually. So I will be doing that kind of follow-up video with it in a bit once it's done rendering everything. I'm not going to renumber any of these. I'm just going to go down here. Instead of it being set to perspective, set it to camera 1. I'm also going to uncheck alpha mask. You've got that one there. Okay, so that is by default usually checked because it's a PNG. I'm going to turn it off. All right, sometimes you do want that, but right now I don't because I have my white kind of lit sky dome. Also change your preset to HD 720. So it's 1280 by 720. That's set. That's perfect. Don't worry about the device aspect ratio. It's okay. Pixel aspect ratio is 1. Perfect. Now, Arnold renderer. This is where if you start to notice and you've got maybe a dark scene, lots of shadows, this is where you can kind of play with some of these sliders and see maybe if it's subsurface scattering, you've got some shiny materials and you want the reflections to go up, then you can crank that up, and diffuse as you want. Another one in specular highlights, you can adjust those. The more you take these up, and camera is kind of like overall settings, the more you take these up, then the longer your render time is going to be. Okay. There's also this motion blur you can enable if you want to. I'm going to turn mine off because I just have my camera moving right now, but that is another option. Don't worry about any of these. We're not dealing with those. These are the 2 tabs you need to pay attention to. Now, of course, what you can always do is kind of crank it up, see how that improves the quality of the image. This is something that it takes kind of dealing with lighting and other dynamics. You want to kind of work gradually because it does bring up the render time. Okay, so those are the settings that I want. That's totally fine for what I've got right now within my scene. And now what you need to do is go into the rendering menu here and then go to render. And what you're going to want to do is click here where it says render sequence, right? And I'm going to actually click on here so you can see the options. It's set for camera 1. That's totally fine. I've just got my layers here that I'm going to, I don't need to check any of them. It's going to be rendering everything out. What I'm going to do is click on render sequence and close. Now, you see this window. This is that render window that I showed you before. It is working. So what I also want to make sure of too is, you know, you're working on your own computers, right? If you're working on the lab computers, I would make sure too, I've got this running and I'm going to open up Finder window here and you guys can see it too. This is what I'm interested in checking out. This is what I want to keep tabs on, okay? It's going to be creating all of these PNGs. You can always see them and, you know, see the one in process that's going. That one's not going to show up as being completed. It shows up as 0 kilobytes until it's done with it and it moves on to the next image. But it's going to sit there and start to render through all of these, and then it will close the render view window. Make sure that your computer is set to not go to sleep too, okay? So that is something I want to make sure of that you guys are aware of. Don't have your computers go to sleep, all right? I'm going to let this run and I'll come back and we'll take it from there, okay? Okay, so we got the images rendered out. They're all here. Looking at them, it looks good. Of course, as you're going through, you can always just double click on one just to double check, make sure it's all good. And there we go, 120. Perfect. Okay, so I'm keeping these for now in my images folder, but what I would also recommend doing is I'm going to go up one. Here is my Maya file. And of course, I can always create a new folder. I'm going to call this Project 1 After Effects Composite. Okay. And what I would actually be doing here is all of these files are going to be brought into my After Effects project folder, or project and folder. So what I'm going to do right now is actually move them into, I'm going to take all of those files into this one right here. Okay, so I'm just dumping them, and this is where this folder, the new folder that I created, is actually going to be where I put all of my After Effects files and everything. So what I could even do here is also just make these into a new folder here inside of there. So it's not new folder with items, but it is here scene, or actually let's do frame 1 through, and this was 120. Okay, so I'm going to be able to come through here and I can know quickly which ones I'm importing, okay, when I'm going into After Effects. So what I'm going to do is hop into After Effects. I've already got it open. Whoop. Here. And let me just resize this window. So I'm going to create a new project. All right. So I'm inside of After Effects. This is a brand new project. I'm going to want to go into File, and what I'm actually going to do is go in and import, and I'm going to just select a file right here. That is going to bring open my import window. Give it a second here. And what I'm going to want to do is actually go in here, right in here. Right, so what I can do is select all of these, and I'm going to extend this so you can see. But what I'm going to do is shift select all of these. Now I know I just selected import file, but what I'm going to do is select this option to create a PNG sequence. That's super important. If you don't see those options, make sure that you open up the options, select PNG sequence. I don't need to force an image sequence range here, because the thing is that it's already numbered and it's going to pick up on that and make sure that I have got all of these going in correct order here. So what I'm going to do is just click on open. Now, if you don't get this same setup here, if I double click on this, you can see here is my actual image sequence. It brought it in as a PNG. It's an image sequence. By forcing it to think of it as an image sequence, it's kind of like working with a couple of seconds of video here at this point, okay? What I'm also gonna need to do, and if it didn't work for you, if you double clicked in here and you selected the frames that you wanted, but you didn't select this, let me show you what it does. And this is what you don't ever want to have happen, right? So it's unchecked here. If you click on this and you see that, see all of this, and it's still importing, if that happens to you, Command Z, undo that, and then make sure that when you're selecting all of these, you have PNG sequence selected, okay? Make sure of that. So I'm going to click here, import it again, just so you can see it. It's the same sequence, but there is something wrong up here that we need to fix. And this is just something within After Effects that happens. What you can see is that this frame rate is set to 30 frames per second. My actual animation inside of Maya, right? If you guys remember, I went down over here. It is set to, my frame rate is set to 24 frames per second. That's what I want to have with my After Effects project. And I need to make sure that it interpolates the footage at 24 frames per second. The default right now is 30, and that's not what I want. So right click on the clip here, and you have to do this with each of these. And you're gonna select, let's see, interpret footage, and I'm gonna click on main, and see how it assumes that the frame rate is 30? Change that to 24. Okay, don't worry about the rest of it. That's all fine. I'm gonna click OK. And you're gonna have to do it with the other clip too. Interpret footage, main, set it to 24 instead of 30. And then just click OK. All right, now you've got, when I double click on this clip, you can see it opens up a footage window. I can actually just close that. Everything looks good. There's no glitches. If you happen to get like a little glitch in here, what you can do is just treat it like a clip of video, and you would just cut it out. Make sure that you re-import, re-render, and then import in that After Effects frame. So I'm going to now just drag this down into this is my first opening scene, right? If I need to have some kind of transition or something like that, I can always just work with, well, I can just draw. Here, I'm going to click off of that. And so I'm just creating a shape, and I could animate the opacity of that shape. I'm going to turn the stroke actually, so it's at null here. Let me just drag a little square over it, okay? Now what I'm gonna do here, bring this way down. Just want a couple of seconds of a little fade here. I'm gonna bring this, slide this over, so right there, okay? And it's gonna, let's just get that for slow, kind of 1 second, and then I'm gonna slide this over. Now, be aware of the fact that at this moment, because I just dragged down that first image sequence with just 120 frames. This whole composition is only, what, 5 seconds? Not even. And what I need to do is go up into composition settings, and also change it from 5 seconds. Well, I would recommend give yourself a little extra time. I'm gonna set mine to 50. All right, and then I'm gonna click on OK. So now at this point, if I zoom out, you can see, right, I've got a lot longer composition. And I'm gonna go back in here, get out of the rectangle tool, zoom in, so you can see, right? And spacebar, it's nice to get spacebar back here. I can play it. Of course, I'm gonna wanna transition that, so I'd want to adjust the opacity there. Kind of slide it in a little bit like that. So you can have it, and I would want to, of course, go in. I'm gonna just work with this transform option for the opacity and zoom in. But anyways, you've got your clips right in here. Of course, you can think of these as like video clips, right? So here's the end of it. If I need to use this one again, what I would recommend doing here is I can just always grab this other one, drag it down here, wherever my playhead plops it, right there at the end. And then I can just kind of stagger, either go up or go down, it's up to you. But that is how, and of course it's going to shoot back here to the beginning scene, but that is how you would be putting together your final composition inside of After Effects. And of course, if you have any audio, I had some other audio that I wanted to include. What I would recommend doing is I did not put it inside of my After Effects file, and I totally need to. So I'm going to go back into, now the only thing you can see, here's my audio that I'm going to want to double click and import. I'm going to go up one. Of course, I can always bring this in here. Remember, in After Effects, what it does is it creates little links to these files. You also want to make sure you save this. So go to File, and I'm going to click on Save. And I'm going to make sure I have that project folder where I've imported things. I'm going to call this Project 1 Final Render. AEP, After Effects project, click on Save. Save it to the same folder where you have your images, okay? So I just moved them out of my Maya file, project folder, and then I put them in my After Effects file, okay? So I'm going to kind of click, drag. You would want to make sure in this situation, you have your audio here. You can, of course, click and drag and bring it in to After Effects. There is some audio editing you can do here within After Effects. You can go in with the audio levels. Like if you want to have this kind of slowly fade in, I can do the same thing, right? And animate it, turn that on, take it all the way down, go forward a couple of frames, and then crank it back to 0. So that was pretty fast. Let me get in here and kind of see how, yeah, maybe a little bit. Okay, so that one's not going to work as well. You have some audio editing, but it's not the same as working with Audition or Audacity. Also, let me get back to the transition. You guys know you can go in with, I just used a rectangle and I would be animating that. So I'm going to have it black for a second. Then right here is, I'm going to set an opacity keyframe. It's at 100% opacity. And then I'm going to move forward a couple of frames and I am going to take it down to 0. So, right, my quick little fade in, make sure that you save. I used just a shape layer. It was a black rectangle that I created. If you're having any issues with After Effects, just let me know. Of course, you can always make your own little titles and that kind of thing. So I clicked, created some paragraph text right here. Always, you can just, oh, let's go with that one, not thin, let's go with black, right? And of course, you can always make it white too. Anyways, you got a lot of possibilities here. And of course, that text layer here, I'm going to take it way down, bring it back, and of course, you have a lot of possibilities here with everything. Yep. Okay. Okay, save. That's just a quick little bit that I created right there. Of course, you know, you can have fun with After Effects, do quite a bit within it as well. But remember, for this portion, what you want to do is make sure you bring in your image sequence and make sure that you are, when you're double clicking in here and you're selecting those frames here, that you are actually, takes a second to pick it up, PNG sequence. You have to actually select them all to then get that option to get the PNG sequence. So that is super key to what it is that you're doing. And then of course, also right-clicking on the actual PNG sequences and then go to interpret the footage, main, set it to 24 frames per second, click OK. All right, now once you're wanting to render this out so then you can put it up on Vimeo, what I would recommend doing here is select that composition, go to File, I'm going to go to Export, Add to Media Encoder Queue. Compression on video files, so we want to use that. I'm going to give it a second because my system's going to be kind of chugging here. But then I'm going to go through and I'll just show you the settings that you want to work with within Media Encoder. And you're going to see this kind of layout. Okay, so here's my queue. I've got H.264 set, and that's the default right now for the file format, and that's totally fine. If you go look up on YouTube, you're going to see the MP4, which is the codec H.264. You've also got that for Vimeo. That is, and it won't let me, here we go, H.264 as well as the codec that is preferred. So that's exactly what we want here. If you happen to click on this by accident, what will happen is you'll see the same render window that you have in Premiere Pro. Don't worry about it. I'll just show you. You've got a lot of different presets. Usually match source high bitrate will be perfectly fine. It's going to render it out at 1280 by 720 AAC with the audio, and it will, usually that preset will be just fine, but I'll show you, you do have some other ones to choose from. So you'll see here, I'm just rendering out a small portion of my video here in the work area. So this is the default one that I've used. You have a lot of other ones here. So maybe you want to use the Vimeo 720p. Just make sure that you are looking, so that output should match up with the like 24 frames, 1280 by 720. That should be matching up with the source file, okay? So I'm not rendering out very much, but you can see here with this one, it does a pretty good job. You also have, I know it does give you other options for instance, YouTube as well. But you'll see pretty much all of the encoding. It's VBR one pass, and that one also does, you can see pretty much the same settings there. anyways, you guys don't have to worry about dealing with any of this stuff. You can just click on OK. You want to make sure you're looking to see where that output file is going to go. It's going to want to put it in the After Effects folder here that it created with all of my pre-saved, that has all of my, excuse me, After Effects project, the autosave files right in there. But I'm going to leave this one as is, and I'm going to save it one folder ahead. I'm going to click on Save. Oh, do I want to replace it? Yes, let's replace it. And because that was an earlier test, what you want to do is select this one that you have in the queue, and then you want to click on that little green button. And so the last time I did this, it did not show me the preview, but this is a great thing to watch. Make sure that you've got your video showing up there. It's going to be a little choppy right now, but that's it. Okay, you heard that little noise. That is it, done. So that MP4 video that you just created, you're going to want to make sure that you then are putting that one, and I'm going to grab it right now, watch it again in QuickTime. Yep, here it is. So you're just going to want to make sure that everything's a-okay with this file, and then you would be uploading this MP4 file to Vimeo. Okay, so that's it. That's the process. Let me know if you guys have any questions. All right, take care.